The wind roared through the streets of Washington, D.C., swirling brittle autumn leaves across the cracked sidewalks. Ethan Carter shivered, pulling his frayed coat tighter around his body, his fingertips aching from the relentless cold. He sat hunched on a time-worn bench in Lafayette Park, eyes locked on the grand, unyielding facade of the White House, an emblem of power, influence, and decisions that shaped the nation. Yet, for someone like him, a soldier who had given his best years to war only to return as a forgotten civilian, that power had never once reached his hands. A year ago, he had been at the helm of a logistics unit in Afghanistan, ensuring that troops had the supplies they needed to make it through another day. He had made life-or-death decisions in the thick of chaos, choices that shaped the fate of those under his command. And now, no one even glanced at his resume. No relevant industry experience, they wrote. Not a cultural fit. The rejection emails blurred into an indistinguishable wave of rejection, a stark reminder that his years of dedication to his country meant nothing in the civilian workforce. 3 days ago, an eviction notice appeared on his apartment door, cold and indifferent. His savings had run dry, his phone silent, no job offers, no callbacks, no lifelines. He had survived war zones, navigated bullets and bombs, but nothing had prepared him for this, a battle against a system that had discarded him the moment his uniform came off. Then, last night, he saw her. Karoline Leavitt stood poised behind a podium, her voice unwavering as she addressed a sea of journalists. She spoke of job creation, economic recovery, and opportunities for Americans. Ethan barely processed the words, just the tone, the air of certainty, the confidence, so polished it almost felt rehearsed. He had once carried that same certainty before life had ground him down into something unrecognizable. And then, like lightning striking in the dead of night, it hit him. If no one would listen to him, he would force them to. If doors wouldn't open, he would walk straight through them. A plan began to take shape, reckless, desperate, but alive. He would go to that press conference, stand before the cameras, and say the one thing no politician could ignore: I need a job. He knew the risks: security would be tight, he could be thrown out, arrested even. But for the first time in months, he felt something other than despair. He straightened his back, exhaled into the freezing air, and made his decision. Tomorrow, he would walk into the biggest fight of his life. No bullets, no battle lines, just the harsh, unforgiving reality of a country that had abandoned him. Washington pulsed with restless energy as Ethan moved toward the towering hotel hosting the press conference. The sidewalks bustled with journalists, cameramen, and political staffers, all marching with singular focus. Security officers flanked every entrance, their sharp eyes scanning the crowd, searching for anything or anyone that didn't belong. Ethan's grip tightened on his backpack, his pulse hammering. He had no press badge, no official invitation, no reason to be there. But what he did have was desperation, more than any of these reporters, more than the politicians inside, more than anyone who had never felt the weight of being unseen. As he neared the side entrance, a cluster of regional reporters flashed their credentials, breezing past the checkpoint. Ethan inhaled deeply, adjusting his stance. Confidence, authority, precision. The military had drilled those into him. Now, they were his only weapons. Steeling himself, he stepped forward, blending into the flow. He pretended to check his phone, his heart pounding. He was nearly through when a sharp voice cut through the air. Press badge. Ethan stopped cold. Slowly, he turned to face the officer, a tall, seasoned man whose eyes held the weight of years in the job. His stomach twisted, but his voice remained steady. I don't have one. The officer's expression hardened. Then you don't belong here. Ethan hesitated. A half second. No more. Then, locking eyes with the man, he asked, Are you a veteran? Something flickered, brief, but there. The man's jaw tensed. 8 years. Marine Corps. Ethan squared his shoulders. Then you understand. I served too. I'm not here to make trouble. I just need to say something, not to the press, not to the public, to her. A long silence stretched between them. Around them, Journalists bustled into the press hall, oblivious to the quiet battle unfolding. The officer exhaled through his nose, glancing over Ethan one more time before stepping aside. "Last row. Stay quiet. Don't make me regret this." Ethan nodded, gratitude catching in his throat. "You won't." He moved swiftly, slipping into the crowded press room, sinking into a chair in the very last row. Rows of journalists sat shoulder to shoulder, cameras primed, fingers poised over keyboards. At the front, under the sharp glow of overhead lights, the podium stood tall, the White House emblem looming behind it. Then the energy shifted. The doors swung open, and Karoline Leavitt entered the room. The silence was immediate. She wasn't the president, but she might as well have been. As one of the most influential voices in the administration, she wielded power, dictated narratives, decided who was heard and who was ignored. She strode to the podium with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished floor in sharp, deliberate beats. Ethan clenched his fists beneath the table. This was it. His moment. The first question fired off, a CNN reporter inquiring about economic policies. Karoline responded with polished ease. Another journalist pressed on foreign affairs. She pivoted seamlessly, sidestepping controversy like a seasoned battlefield strategist. For nearly 40 minutes, she commanded the room. Then, the nod came. A subtle signal from an aide at the side of the room. Time to wrap up. It was now or never. Ethan pushed back his chair. Stood. Ms. Leavitt. The room froze. Every head turned. A ripple of confusion spread. Who was this man? No microphone. No camera. No press credentials. Karoline's gaze snapped to him, razor sharp. For a fraction of a second, her expression flickered. Not fear, but calculation. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. My name is Ethan Carter. I served in Afghanistan for 10 years. And I need a job. The room erupted. Reporters whispered furiously. Cameras zoomed in. Security moved toward him, but Karoline raised a single hand. Wait. Silence. She studied him. You're telling me you can't find work? Ethan didn't flinch. No one will hire me. They see veteran on my resume, and they assume I can't adapt. That I'm broken. That I don't belong. A murmur swept through the crowd. This wasn't just policy anymore. It was personal. Karoline exhaled. And what exactly do you expect me to do? Ethan didn't blink. I don't want a handout. I want the same chance as anyone else. A new voice cut through the air. Are you seriously considering this? Victoria Hayes, head of human resources for a major contracting firm, leaned forward. If you acknowledge this, you open a door you can't close. And there it was. The real battle. Karoline hesitated. Then, she stepped back from the podium. Come up here. Gasps. Reporters frantically typing. Ethan swallowed hard but moved forward, past rows of stunned faces, past the flashing cameras. The lights blinded him, but he didn't care. Karoline turned to him. If I give you a chance, what will you do with it? He met her gaze. Prove that veterans aren't a liability. We're this country's greatest untapped resource. She nodded. Then let's start fixing this. The press room exploded. But Ethan? He only knew one thing. His fight had just begun. The air was thick with tension, a charged atmosphere fueled by the rapid-fire questions from journalists, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Microphones were thrust forward, cameras zooming in, eager to capture every flicker of emotion that crossed Karoline Leavitt's face. Yet, she didn't answer. Not immediately. Not yet. Her gaze remained locked on Ethan Carter, unwavering and deliberate. The weight of this moment pressed against her like a storm cloud before the break. She had spent years perfecting the art of controlling the narrative, of turning any situation into a strategic advantage. But this was different. This wasn't a well-rehearsed speech or a calculated maneuver. This was a direct challenge, live and inescapable, from a veteran standing before her in front of the entire nation, demanding more than rhetoric. Demanding action. The energy in the room was electric. Reporters leaned in, poised on the edge of their seats, waiting for her response. Her political advisors, standing at the perimeter, sent silent, urgent signals, pleading for her to shut this down before it spiraled beyond control. And beside Ethan, Victoria Hayes stood with her arms folded, her sharp gaze drilling into Karoline with a silent rebuke. Ethan didn't waver. He had stood his ground in war zones before, but this was a battlefield of a different kind. Here, it wasn't bullets he had to dodge. It was scrutiny, dismissal, the risk of being reduced to a fleeting headline rather than a man with a cause. Karoline exhaled slowly and adjusted the microphone. "You want a chance?" she asked, her voice calm, deliberate. "Then let's talk about what that really means." Ethan straightened, his expression steady. "I want the same opportunity as anyone else. No shortcuts. No favors. Just a fair shot." A murmur swept through the crowd. Some reporters exchanged skeptical glances, while others typed furiously, already crafting their next headlines. Karoline's fingers tapped against the podium, a rhythm of controlled thought. "A fair shot," she echoed, tilting her head slightly. "You think this country hasn't given veterans opportunities?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "On paper, maybe. But in reality? We apply for jobs and get rejected before anyone even looks at us. Companies assume we can't adapt, that we're damaged, that we're a liability instead of an asset." "So, you're saying the private sector is failing veterans?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "I'm saying the entire system is failing us." A thick silence blanketed the room. That was a line no politician wanted to hear, not just an accusation, but a direct challenge. A demand for accountability that couldn't be brushed aside. Karoline's arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable. Then she made a decision. "If that's the case," she said, voice steady, "then let's fix it." The room erupted. Journalists shouted over one another, desperate for clarification. Ethan turned toward her, his muscles tensed. "Fix it how?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Karoline raised a hand, and the chaos simmered down. "Starting Monday, you'll have a position at the Department of Veterans Affairs. You want to prove veterans are an asset? Then prove it from the inside." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even Ethan felt his chest tighten at the sheer weight of what had just happened. Had she really? Victoria Hayes stood abruptly, her stance rigid. "Karoline, this is reckless." Karoline didn't so much as glance her way. "Is it?" Victoria stepped forward, her voice clipped and professional. "We have hiring procedures, protocols, regulations exist for a reason." Karoline finally turned to her. "And how many of those processes have actually helped veterans like him?" Victoria hesitated, lips pressing into a thin line. "That's not the point." Karoline arched an eyebrow. "I think it is." The tension between them was palpable, a battle line drawn in front of an audience of eager eyes and rolling cameras. Victoria's voice dropped, barely audible over the low hum of reporters murmuring among themselves. "You don't just create jobs on a whim, Karoline. This sets a precedent. It invites scrutiny, criticism. You're making it look like we make decisions based on spectacle rather than policy." Karoline's response was immediate. "Good," she said simply. "Let them criticize. At least they'll be talking about it." Ethan felt his pulse hammering in his ears. He had come here to be heard, but now he was about to become the face of something much bigger than himself. He swallowed hard, then met her gaze. "I accept." Karoline nodded. "Then you'll report to the Department of Veterans Affairs first thing Monday morning." Victoria's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue further. Not here. Not in front of the cameras. The room exploded with more questions. Is this just political theater? What message does this send to private employers? "Ms. Leavitt, are you prepared for the backlash?" Karoline turned back to the reporters, her voice unwavering. "We honor veterans when they're in uniform. We thank them for their service, wave our flags, post tributes on social media. But the moment they come home, the moment they need us, where are we?" Silence fell once again. "We say we support them," she continued, her tone firm, "but support isn't words. It's action. And this," she gestured toward Ethan, "this is action. The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion on Ethan's face. He could already see the headlines forming, the political analysts dissecting every word. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice lower now, rougher. "It's about every veteran who's been told they don't belong. If this system can't see our value, then we'll make them see it." A slow, heavy pause settled over the room. Karoline turned back to the press. "I suggest you all start paying attention." Then, without another word, she stepped away from the podium. Ethan exhaled sharply, the moment sinking in. His world had changed in the span of minutes. He wasn't just another veteran struggling to be seen anymore. Now he was the face of a fight that had just begun.